Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming back after lunch. If I was you, I'd probably having a nap in an armchair outside somewhere. I'm going to introduce myself quickly. Harshu is going to introduce himself quickly, and then I'm going to kind of kick in and start to talk about our journey, and we'll tig-tag as we go. So my name is Grainne Kearns. I'm the CIO at Lion. I've been at Lion for 2 years today, in fact, and in that time we've been on a very significant transformation journey. We've been upgrading our SAP systems and doing an all-of-business transformation. That involves replacing 550 legacy systems with our new solution. Plus, in parallel, just for the fun of it, we decided to do an all-of-IT transformation. And with that all-of-IT transformation, we've had a big focus on what's the Lion 10-year strategy going forward. And for us, our 10-year strategy is around our customer, our creativity, and our culture. Hence, the big push as part of the IT transformation around that innovation agenda. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go through the slides.
Cool, thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Harshu Deshpande. I lead Accenture's Liquid Studio capability, which is Accenture's innovation hub. So we effectively help clients do emerging tech work and actually help launch new products, services, or ventures to market in a really rapid manner. So we're doing not just the tech part, but also doing some of the commercial aspects, some of the business aspects of creating those new products and services in a really rapid manner. You've seen kind of DJ Bax out there, which is effectively an 8-year-old robot that was built by Rethink Robotics. We've been using Amazon Tech to actually bring that one to life. So that's an example of some of the work that Liquid Studio does in ANZ.
Okay, thanks. So just to give you a context of where we were at. So in Lion, we have no shortage of innovative ideas. We're exceptionally good at getting product to market. We're exceptionally good at innovating on new products, and we have hundreds of products which are household names, and many of which are over 100 years old. But we had some significant limitations in our IT space and our technology space around how to get innovative ideas that came to the fore into minimum viable products or lovable products, as Glenn would have said this morning. You know, it could have been a number of things. It could have been somebody had a great idea, they just didn't know where to start to get it moving. They didn't know how to put a cross-functional team together. They didn't know how to execute on a funding model to try to pick up whatever it was that they were trying to do. And so we realized that it wasn't working and that the organization was missing out on some of the innovation capability that existed within Lion. And so we decided that we would have a vision that said we could have an innovative idea and be able to quickly prototype that idea, very quickly prototype it. And that we would then be able to push that product into market very quickly, that we would give our customers and our end users the ability to optimize their businesses as a result of what we could do. And that we would create a different culture that said we were, within IT, we were highly innovative, collaborative, and creative. And so we thought that we would put in place a structured innovation framework. We thought that this was going to be new for Lion because we hadn't had anything structured before, and we wanted to keep it available to the non-technical resources. So we didn't want to make it so complicated that people wouldn't understand what was going on. And so probably over 2 afternoons, we knocked up a very simple innovation framework that had these simple 4 steps in it. We didn't want to over-engineer it, we didn't want to alienate anybody, and we thought, let's favor progression in place of perfection, and let's just get moving and see how things go. And as we speak today, we'll take you from beginning to end on an innovative idea that we pushed through this model and what we learned along the way.
And I think one of the important things that we set out to do very early on was looking at how do we use this to actually just galvanize the organization. So not just doing a prototype or a pilot or a hackathon, but actually use this to drive cultural change and new ways of working through Lion. So one of the big ideas we had was actually using this to look at these 4 key areas that you see on the slide there, which is looking at embedding an agile approach into everything we do. Now, I don't just mean agile as in the methodology, but actually using that to create this model where everyone, as Grainne mentioned, is not stuck to the idea of having everything done precisely or accurately up front. So doing a process where we're not just doing the tech in an iterative fashion, but we're also doing things like the business case in an iterative fashion. We looked at embedding design thinking into everything we do. So getting the business, folks from marketing, folks from finance, used to the idea of doing things like customer journeys, service design aspects, and looking at the end-to-end flow and what the impact of the customer is. We use the growth hacking mentality, so using ideas that are big, bold, and disruptive, not just the run-of-the-mill ideas, and using this framework to evaluate these ideas in a really rapid manner in the 6 to 12-week timeline. And the last one was around this idea of a startup mindset. So thinking about new ideas that we can launch to market for Lion that would really change both cost out as well as top-line revenue growth, so new markets that Lion could go into.
And so as part of the IT transformation, we did a lot of things. We decided that, for the digital and innovation journey that we wanted to head down, there were a significant number of capabilities within the team that were lacking, and we identified between 8 and 12 capabilities that were missing, and so set about establishing those capabilities within our organization. That meant that we had to do something dramatic, and we had to buy in a lot of skills and do a lot of restructure, to the extent that we today have an IT team that is 42% new, which is quite dramatic. And when I say new, I mean those people have been there for less than 1 year. So we were serious about this. We also put in place a whole raft of new processes, governance, KPIs, metrics, reporting, and so on and so forth. Our big thing was not about what's the innovation framework that we're going to use in this example. Our big thing, because anybody can draw the circles on the screen, right? Our big thing was about what's the culture that we're trying to create, both within IT and then push out to the rest of the organization. So one of the teams that we set up an innovation and accelerated delivery capability, and this piece of work ran out of that innovation and accelerated delivery capability. I was kind of running a takeover by stealth that said, let's germinate excitement within our customer teams at lower levels while I try to pitch at the executive levels, and then do a sandwich effect that kind of causes the ideas to spread out. And so we thought we would run our first hackathon, and we decided that it would be a good idea for us to leverage one of our key strengths, which is listening to our customer, understanding what is their problem, and responding. We work on a model that says win-win-win. So if we do something, we want it to be a win for our consumer, we want it to be a win for our customer, and we also want it to be a win for ourselves. In this case, we listened to our farmers. So Lion is in fact, it is the largest food and beverages company in the Australasian region. And in our dairy business, we have a beer, spirits and wine business, and also a dairy and drinks business. In our dairy and drinks business, our raw product is milk. We had an issue for our farmers in that they were suffering milk spoilage. For our farmers in their current climate, a milk spoilage is a fairly significant event. Typically, a milk spoilage is associated with a fluctuation in temperature. And we went and listened to our farmers, found out that this was a problem for them, and wanted to see, was there something that we could use from a technology perspective that would make that problem go away for them, improve the quality of the product for us, and kind of push us down that innovation journey. And so we had landed on an idea which was to help our farmers to reduce the milk spoilage as a result of fluctuations in temperatures. We decided that the best way to kind of germinate interest in this approach was to run a hackathon and a design thinking process. The reason we did the design thinking process was that we wanted to germinate as many solutions as possible to the problem. We wanted to keep our business customers as close as we could as possible to the solutioning, so that they would have a better understanding of how solutioning works and that they would have a closer alignment with IT. We wanted also to prove the ability of distributed teams. So we worked together with Harshu. We put together a distributed team across Accenture and Lion, across Australia and India, and we proved through this process that a distributed team in multiple geographic locations from different organizations would work. We also wanted to prove the ability to wrap around ourselves an ecosystem of specialist providers, recognizing that we didn't have to have all of the expertise in-house. And so we headed off merrily on our journey, saying our model is prototype quickly, get movement, germinate interest, stimulate some excitement. We decided to get a prototype quickly. The best way to do that was to time box our prototyping activity. And in this case, where we're trying to solve milk spoilage, we prototyped our activity down into a 36-hour block, which isn't a whole heap of time, really. So we sat in a room in the morning, we understood what the problem was, we came up with a variety of solutions, we picked the solution we were going to roll with, and then we started moving, and by lunchtime the following day, we had a workable prototype that we were demoing. When we came to the end of the day in Sydney, we handed that piece of work over to India, and they continued with the solution that we had come up with. And Harshu will talk a little bit later about what that solution is. Not only did we build the technology that the farmer would have on his farm, we had also integrated it into our SAP systems, feeding into those systems volume information and temperature information, so that the farmers who were using our technology could get an alert on their mobile phone anytime, anywhere, anyway, so that they would know they had a temperature issue and could respond immediately, thereby reducing the amount of spoilage that was occurring. I think over to you.
If you look at kind of one of the big things in the workshop, in the hackathon, was actually getting stakeholders used to the idea of doing posters, right? So we didn't actually end up looking at doing things like a traditional business case, but the vision poster that you saw in the previous one was actually the slide that we ended up presenting back to the stakeholders to say, here's what our vision looks like, here's what phase 1 might look like, here's what phase 2 might look like. And one of the other things that we really stressed on, Grainne mentioned this before, is there's no shortage of ideas. When we went out to the farmers, farmers were coming up with some crazy ideas. One of the farmers suggested that, hey, why don't you guys build a pill with an IoT sensor in it, so you can feed that to the cow, and the cow would give you the temperature of the cow, and you could tell if the cow was sick or not, and therefore should not be milked at that time. So there was no shortage of ideas of how you could solve the problem. But what we wanted to do was look at the lens of what we call the desirability, feasibility, and viability matrix. So looking at, is this a solution that's technically feasible? And a lot of hackathons and prototypes, that's what you end up focusing on. But we also wanted to focus on, is this desirable for the actual business or for the end customer? And getting that feedback from the farmers. So pretty much after the hackathon was finished, the next thing we did was actually go out to 4 farms and visit them and actually look at the different setups that the farmers have. Actually talk to the farmers about the problems and challenges they're facing and the types of solutions we could build that would actually help them out. And we also, as part of this hackathon process, developed a viability, so a business case, that was also being iterated through the process. So when I go to the solution and I talk about some of the challenges we faced, what we actually did was we actually built the business case week on week. Every time a new sensor had to be put in or a previous sensor didn't work, we looked at, does this make the solution still financially feasible or viable? And we looked at things like, if you now need to install the sensor in a different way, does it make the install cost too high? So all of those types of things really had to be adapted and changed quite rapidly. But we embedded that as part of the prototyping phase. So not just looking at the tech, but also the customer outcome and the business outcome at the same time. So if you look at the solution and what we ended up doing, one of the big factors to the solution was really about keeping the costs to a minimum. So we really focused on using commodity kit wherever possible. We didn't want to go to a proprietary solution. We wanted to leverage the ecosystem, as Grainne mentioned before. So there were a lot of sensor solutions out there. But if you look at milk vats as a problem statement, these milk vats are out in the middle of nowhere. Everyone talks about Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing. But you look at the reality of these milk vats, a lot of these milk vats are decades old. They don't even have digital temperature sensors. Most of them have analog temperature sensors. Usually these vats sit out in the middle of nowhere, well away from any critical infrastructure. So there were a whole bunch of challenges that we faced around things like network connectivity. So one of the first things we looked at is really how do we get this solution connected up using some of the existing challenges that these farmers faced. So one of the big things that we did was actually looked at across Lion's farm landscape, so the 400 farmers that they work with, looked at coverage maps. Can we get 4G connectivity out there, 3G connectivity? We actually ended up settling on using Telstra's new Cat M1 network, which is specifically developed for IoT devices, because that gave us a good balance between network coverage as well as cost. And again, this thing was so new that at the time that we deployed it, they were still releasing new libraries every week that were upgrading the way that you connect to the network. So we faced challenges around that. But the solution evolved. What we went back and told the businesses, this is not a precise solution. It may not work 100%, but we want to try something new and bold and interesting. The other big thing that we did was actually use this capability to then also create almost a farm hub that could be expanded. The idea behind the solution was, yes, we're going to use this right now to measure things like the temperature or the volume of the milk vat, but you could quite easily expand the same solution out and apply it to other parts of Lion's business. So we wanted to use Kit that we could then modularize or expand as the use cases expanded. We used AWS's tech to actually use all of the IoT capabilities, so having all the sensor data being fed back into AWS. And again, the idea was to use that data to do further things beyond just the capability to report on things like temperature and volume. We actually wanted to do things like AI and machine learning as a phase 2 to do things like route tracking. So can you automatically have trucks being sent out to a milk vat that might have failed overnight or the temperature's dropped so that you're reducing the cases or incidents of milk spoilage? And finally, as Grainne mentioned again, the big aspect around this, and we actually did this as part of the hackathon, was integrating the solution back into SAP. So we actually had all the sensor data that was being fed into Amazon also being fed into SAP using Leonardo, so that the dashboards that were shown to the business were the same dashboards that they were used to seeing as part of their broader supply chain solution. And those were all important aspects to demonstrate very early on. And we did that as part of the hackathon and continued on through to the end. The other big aspect to the solution that was a big challenge for us was just the type of sensors that we had to deploy. So one of the big challenges with these milk vats is most of the sensors that need to be deployed need to be food-grade sensors, and they somehow need to be pushed into these milk vats, which are completely sealed. So we looked at things like temperature sensors. Now, a typical temperature sensor you drop into the milk vat, and you can't really do that with milk vats, right? So you can't really have a sensor sitting in the milk vat. So we were looking at solutions where we were drilling holes into the top of the vats. There's still a few vats at a couple of farms where there's still a big hole on the top that we're now working out how to do a 3D printed plug on top of. So lots of interesting examples of how we tried different sensors. And every week, the sensor solution evolved. Eventually, we landed on a solution where we actually used existing temperature data from an analog temperature sensor that was already on the milk vat, plugged the current out of that, and actually pumped it back into an Arduino and a PyCom board that then sent the data back to the cloud. And the interesting thing there is, everyone talks about kind of smart manufacturing and IoT. The challenge really is that you need to be able to do some of these solutions within existing boundaries and existing challenges. And that was the big learning. There were a lot of sensor solutions out there that you could use that were off the shelf, but we had to retrofit a lot of those sensors to actually work within the environments that were available to us within these vats. And each of those processes or each of those steps that we took were learning parts of the journey. So what we did was when we deployed a new sensor, we not only looked at the install cost of that sensor, but also the ongoing maintenance cost of that sensor. And that was fed back into the business case to give to the business to say, hey, does this solution still make it feasible and viable based on the original business case assumptions?
I'm going to add a couple of things before I flick onto your next slide. So this was interesting for us. So there were two key components that I felt drove a kind of embracing of what it was we were doing. So the fact that we linked back into the SAP systems and were producing dashboards kind of gave what we were doing a greater sense of gravitas from a business perspective. So it moved out of the realm of trying to do something quite kind of innovative in an isolated arena to actually, this actually is feeding into our back-end systems, and it's kind of I'm seeing a different IT. We also had the experience that when the connectivity issue presented itself, that our internal customers were okay with that. Whereas had they been in your traditional project environment where they had waited maybe 6 months for something, getting to this stage and finding that your connectivity was an issue just was not very excitable or tolerable for them. So we found, as a result of having the challenges that we encountered along the way, that we were actually by accident shifting their culture without them even realizing it. And now their appetite has increased around accepting risk associated with projects, and particularly where we're doing something new.
If you looked at the solution that we then came up with, there wasn't just a benefit there for Lion, but there was also a net benefit for farmers. If you look at where these milk vats are placed on a farm, usually these milk vats are out in the middle of nowhere. The farmer has no ability to go out there and check it. So if the milk vat, the temperature fails, the cooling fails overnight, they have no ability to understand what's actually happened. So as part of the solution, there was also a second aspect that we ended up building out, which was being able to give a mobile phone app to a farmer to look at things like temperature sensing. But in addition to that, they were also able to work out things like when the milk vat was being cleaned, when the milk vat ended up being emptied out, and whether it was done on time, or if the truck that was supposed to come through didn't come through on the right time. And that ability to give them that visibility in real time on a mobile phone app was revolutionary for them, right? It made a huge difference to their lives around how they were being presented with that data. So what that really showed us was the ability for us to not only help Lion in terms of the way that it's doing the pickups of the milk, but also creating a bit of a stickiness with the customer, where we were giving a net benefit back to the farmer as well.
I foolishly thought you had another slide to go, so I was sitting over there quite relaxed, and I'm saying, what am I supposed to be talking about? Okay, so I'll quickly flick on. So, you know, when you look at it in terms of the numbers, we spent 48 hours to get from we have an idea to we've got a workable proof of concept that we can demonstrate and is integrated into our SAP systems. We had a pool of 400 farms that we deal with. And within 8 weeks, we were out and prototyping and installing on our first lot of farms. We had gone out to the farmers with our prototype to ask them were they working and were they not working and what was it that they needed to do, and we adjusted accordingly. As I said, within 8 weeks we were out and we were deploying. At this stage we have one site that's fully operational, and we're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year associated with milk spoilage. The interesting thing for us is that there are actually 5,000 farms in Australia who could benefit from this technology, and we're not at all concerned about the fact that some of those, or the majority of those, would not be Lion customers. So for us, the interest is, what is it that we can create that can help the farming community within Australia? The scalability issue for us also was about not having to have it 100% right from the moment we started off. We found when we went out into our farming environments that we probably could have paid a bit more attention to what the scalability issues were. I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier on your last slide. So, you know, I'll talk a bit later about how we went back and we then adjusted our innovation framework to reflect on that.
I think just to touch on one more thing, so the interesting aspect for us was also this whole idea of bringing IT and operation technology closer together. So one of the big learnings out of this process was also looking at things like, you know, if the PyCon board that was deployed out there failed in the middle of the night, how do you do a restart? So typically with operation technology, you're not quite used to having someone being able to do things like remote patching of devices, embedded devices. And it was a learning for us as well, because the first time the board failed, we had to actually ask the farmer, call them up the next day and ask them to restart the board. So it was a learning for us to say, no, actually we need to be able to build a restart that we can deploy remotely. So some of those aspects which would have taken months for us to realize ended up being realized very early on, and we started to adapt the solution very quickly to meet those requirements by doing that early stage deployment.
So as I said, we went through the process. We had put that original innovation framework together in like a couple of afternoons. We went through the process and realized that there were some things that we could leverage from the lessons learned. We quickly realized that we needed to put in some markers around expectation from a funding perspective, and I think Harshu touched on that earlier, where he said we weren't using the old model that said you got a big bag of money up front, but we use a model that says we get an amount of seed funding. As we progress through various steps, we reassess, and we see if the ROI is maintained. If it's not, out it goes, we start again. We put in an increased level around the sustainability. Plus, we realized that there were a certain number of things that we needed to do to achieve success when it came to this type of activity. One of them was to pick an idea and to stick with it like a dog with a bone. Don't get excited by different, technologies that come to the table and wander off and do something else like a puppy. So what we realized was, sure, you can change on the solutioning that's coming to the table, but it's really, really, really important to stay focused on what is the key problem that I'm trying to solve and what are the business issues that I'm trying to deal with. We also found it's really important to get out to your customer early. So in our case, get out to your farmer early. We probably would have gone out a little bit earlier had this not been our first one. We also learned that having your business customer as close as possible is really, really a key thing for us. probably one of the biggest lessons that we learned was coaching around the culture that we're trying to create. So we were very clear up front, what is the culture that we're trying to create, not just within Lion IT, but also within greater Lion, so that our diverse teams would work, and coaching around that culture so that that was always the way that we operated on every initiative that we were dealing with. Were there any?
I was just going to add, so, I mean, we started off with the idea of the hackathon, but really the hackathon kind of grew from there, right? So we've done multiple hackathons since then to really look at different parts of the business and using that as a mechanism to actually use that to funnel ideas through. So every time, every quarter, if there's about 10 ideas, you can actually funnel those through, do that DVF analysis to look at desirability, feasibility, and viability, and then use the hackathon to actually work out which of those ideas actually has merit. And working that through in a structured and systematic process. The winning idea out of that process then goes into the next phase and goes out to the pilot and becomes a repeatable process that you can go and repeat over and over again each quarter. And becomes a structured process to take these 100 ideas and move them through this process in a systematic manner.
So for us, as I said, we stood up the Innovation and Accelerated Delivery team. We stood it up as a test and learn, really. I was trying to do a tickle on the organization and see how kind of responsive they would be were we to head down this path. The level of enthusiasm was fantastic, to be honest. So the next steps for us are to scale up on that function so that we can run it across, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 simultaneous initiatives at the same time, and to make all of the organizational changes that are required both within Lion IT and in the rest of Lion, so we can work in a much more agile way, change all of our funding models, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really been a bit of a test bed for us. We've run a number of hackathons very successfully. This is just one of the ones that we chose to work off. But based on what we've seen and the experience and reaction of our customers and the appetite for our customers, they are now saying, let's scale it. We want more of this. And we're seeing the funding coming in, we're seeing the initiatives coming in, and we're off and we're ready to go. So a good success story for us, I think.
Great, so I think we've got time for a few questions. If that's next. There's a question here. I think there's a roving microphone.
This is the audience participation opportunity, guys. So.
I think there's
be gentle on us now, be gentle.
Hello. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Just a quick question. As part of the design thinking workshops or the design thinking process, did you use your customers as part of that?
Yeah, so the first one we did, and this was the first hackathon we did, we actually brought in just the business, and this was the part of the business that does the quality assurance, and part of the Lion business. The second set of hackathons we did, we've actually looked at bringing in the end user much earlier in the process. So potentially not in the hackathon, but doing it as a pre-activity such that we can get their feedback prior to going into hackathon with some feedback ideas. No, so design thinking workshops were part of the hackathon. So in some cases, we ran something like a service design or customer journey ahead of the hackathon, depending on the time and the availability of stakeholders. And then within the hackathon, we ended up fleshing out that in a little bit more detail. But evaluating ideas, we might have done that ahead of the workshop itself or the hackathon.
So once we get out of the test and learn stage and are operating in anger, the vision would be that the hackathons are all cross-business unit and with customers in there as well. So that would be where we're going, but we're not there yet, but it would be the next step for us.
You mentioned that you've got 42% new team in the last 12 months. Is that because of the replacement of skills, getting new skills, or is it part of expanding with Accenture team?
It was a whole raft of things. So it was associated with, first of all, we were doing an outsourcing activity to Accenture, and associated with that, we didn't need so many hands on the tools, as I call them, but we needed a different set of skills around service delivery managers. Plus, we recognized that to head down the digital path, we had somewhere between 8 and 12 capabilities that we were missing. And this was about hiring skills that had those new capabilities that would get us to where we needed to be. And some of the guys that are in this team and the guy who leads this team, we would have gone outside and brought them in recognition that we wanted those new skills. So it's quite a dramatic change, but we were very clear on what our strategy was and what our vision was, what capabilities we needed within IT to deliver on those, what the skill sets were, and therefore we took the necessary action. It wasn't easy though.
I've got a question about the cultural coaching you mentioned, and I'm interested in some of the strategies that you've employed there.
Well, primarily stealth, to be honest, right? So my plan, my great plan was, sometimes when you're dealing with an executive team, they may not be as digitally savvy as we may like. So my great plan was to kind of, do the slow burn education at the executive team level, but just to generate some massive enthusiasm and excitement 2 levels down. So typically 2 levels down are the people who cause an organization to change. What I realized when I got to Lion was that I had so many legacy systems and so much technical debt that the innovation capability was massive, and that was what had caused my problem. And I thought, well, actually that problem, that root cause for me is actually a massive opportunity, and therefore stood up the innovation and accelerated delivery team and decided to stimulate that as much as I could, as quickly as I could, by doing stuff that would be valuable to our customers and valuable to our internal IT business partners. And I thought that if I showed them and they felt it and experienced it, it would be way better than any kind of sitting in a room training them on, agile coaching methodologies or whatever. So, very, very quickly, our feedback on IT moved from you're too slow, you're too expensive, I can't get any traction, everything takes, everything's too hard, you stop everything, to 98% positive, purely because of the experience they were having around a lot of this stuff. And most of that feedback was coming out of the innovation and accelerated delivery team. And so I leveraged that as much as I could. And it then started to percolate up. So they became my champions and my advocates, to the extent where, the CEO would stop me and say, I've been talking to the MD of the beer business in Australia, and he's saying things like, who would have thought Lion and IT could do this kind of stuff? So I went by stealth, yeah.
Down the front here, we're going.
So one of the things that I find and thank you for sharing your story, it's great, is that you get these innovation and accelerator delivery teams, and then you get the business as usual teams, and they feel a bit sort of left behind in the process.
See, I was having this conversation with the guys just yesterday, and
Yeah.
I used an analogy that Harshu really likes. I don't know whether it's flattering, but I kind of say they're 2 different things, right? There are squares and there are circles. And I feel that if I put those 2 together, that one benefits and one is disadvantaged. Because what I feel can happen is the innovation guys, if there aren't enough of them, can get consumed by the other guys, and therefore we kind of lose the benefit of that. I feel like the other guys, if there's enough of these guys, we can, if there's enough of these guys, you can change these guys. So the model that I took was to keep them as separate as I possibly could while they were small, and as they grow, we'll bang them in and cause those squares to turn into ovals at least, if not circles. Yeah, but it's a challenge, and I'm a big, I have a fascination around diversity and inclusion. But I have an even bigger fascination around innovation and inclusion, but I have an even bigger fascination around innovation and exclusion. Because you can have people as good as you like sitting over here, but if they're excluded from what is normally the major part of the organization, nothing happens, right? So the secret balance is, how do I get that balance right so that one doesn't consume the other?
I think what we're finding as well is, as I do this at multiple clients, doing just innovation in isolation doesn't work, because the other team will end up then kiboshing it when you get to the scale phase. So we're doing a lot of cross-pollination, so bringing those people into that innovation team for a period of time, and when the solution's ready to scale, actually put them back out to the field. But then they've become champions for us within that team, and they've seen the process. And using that to also drive that culture change, understanding the new ways of working and those types of things.
But I did have to manage it. So, when I started off, it was all good feedback, and these guys were like, we're sick of hearing about them. Jesus, we're all doing this great work, blah, blah. So you have to manage it carefully, yeah.
I'll beat you.
Just wondering whether you've got any kind of governance framework around the innovation group, across functional governance, and in the future, as you kind of expand to deliver on multiple projects at a time, how you go about prioritising which ones you work on?
No and yes. So not currently in the test and learn environment, we don't, but it's certainly in the strategy and as part of the plan. So we're currently engaged in a 6-week piece of work that says, how do we take what we have today and scale it using kind of an industry standard model that includes the governance and the prioritization piece that you're talking about. So if you ask me in 2 months, I can tell you the answer. Yeah. We haven't, we're not running in anger sufficiently at this stage for it to be a challenge for us. You know, currently one of our challenges is each of the business units kind of operates in isolation. I need to get to a model that's, and this doesn't work for anyone, including the CEO, I need to get to a model where all of the business units are pushing their initiatives through the same pipe, so we're clear as a business we're spending our money on the right things. So we're probably a couple of months away from that.
Right up the back here.
I would like to ask about that sustain aspects with these sensors. Once it's productionized and all in operation, who's actually supporting and managing those sensors if there's something wrong to those sensors or mobile applications?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, that was one of our
Hey,
evaluation
Harshu,
criteria.
you're out of the vision of the camera.
sorry.
You need to be inside that white line.
Yes, that was actually one of the big areas of consideration for us, because a lot of these sensor manufacturers were small startups in themselves within the Australian market. And obviously, when you're looking at the sensor solution, if they're going to be deployed across 400 farms, needs to be maintained. One of the big aspects was, could that sensor be deployed and then maintained by the existing technicians that have maintained the VATs? And so that was one of our evaluation criteria, is can we make sure that this works within the existing ecosystem that the farmer's already used to? And we looked at not just the cost of installing, but the cost of maintaining as well. So in the business case, in one of the previous slides, and the cost worked out to be something around $800 a year for the sensor and the full solution to be maintained and operated on that farm. And we're looking at, what does that cost look like to Lion as well as the farmers, making sure that's sustainable over a longer period of time. But doing that very much upfront and early as part of the initial prototype phase itself.
Yeah, I guess the agreement with the sensor manufacturer or sensor provider has to go to that level. What type of support they can actually provide, and to a certain level, it should be really simple enough for field people to be able to manage that. Just one more question for you. Regarding that mobile applications you integrated the IoT sensor data into, did you actually integrate back into SAP system as well?
Yeah, so we used SAP Leonardo to actually pump all the data back into SAP and use that to then surface up the same dashboards, but obviously a consolidated view across different farms back to the business. So the farmers were seeing obviously a view of the data of just their farm, and Lion would see the data of everything, all the other farms that the solution would be deployed to.
So what was the mobile application development platform you utilized?
It was a SAP Fury mobile app.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, and this is our lucky last question asker.
Thank you. You talked about the skills and capabilities that you brought into Lion. What were those skills and capabilities? And did you get what you wanted after bringing them in?
Are you a journalist?
No.
Okay, great. I was thinking, I'm going to see this in the newspaper tomorrow. Well, obviously there was one about innovation, and there was another one around agile delivery capability. There was something around digital enablement platforms associated with heading down that journey. We were weak around our governance and risk models within Line IT, and this was kind of going to be important for us when we got into this new world. We had a desire to partner with a new set of service providers. I don't believe I have to always partner with the tier one. I wanted the ability to be able to, sorry Harshu. I wanted the ability to be able to partner with a tier two and a tier three, and therefore I needed different vendor management capabilities. What else? Can't remember. That's kind of a flavor. They were all geared towards, I'm heading down a new path, I'm going to have a new set of technologies, new set of service providers, a different cultural outlook, and this is kind of where I needed to go.